Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. So this happened about 2 years ago, but I'm still getting a kick out of it every Sunday morning when I see a certain white SUV pull up to my egg stand. Let me tell you how I turned an HOA nightmare into my favorite revenge story. I work in tech, mostly from home, and I'd been living in a cramped apartment downtown for way too long. When I finally saved up enough for a house, I knew exactly what I wanted. Not some cookie-cutter suburban place where you can reach out your bedroom window and touch your neighbor's house. I wanted space, maybe room for a garden, and definitely the ability to have some chickens. I'm not some hardcore farmer or anything, but I love cooking, and the whole farm-to-table thing really appeals to me. Plus, fresh eggs just taste better than anything you can get at the store. So when I was house hunting, I made sure to do my homework. I found this great neighborhood with older homes and bigger lots. Most of the properties were around half an acre to an acre, which was perfect. The neighborhood had character. These weren't McMansions thrown up by some developer. These were real homes that people had lived in for decades, with mature trees and established gardens. The kind of place where people actually knew their neighbors and kids could ride bikes without their parents having heart attacks. But here's the thing about nice older neighborhoods. Sometimes new people move in and think they need to improve everything. That's exactly what happened about 5 years before I moved in. A bunch of newer residents got together and convinced everyone to form an HOA. Most of the longtime residents didn't really care one way or the other, so it passed. Before I even made an offer on my house, I spent a weekend at the county planning office. I pulled up all the zoning maps, read through the municipal codes, and made absolutely sure that my future property was zoned for small animals. Sure enough, the county code specifically allowed up to 8 domestic fowl on lots my size. I even got it in writing from the zoning department just to be safe. When I closed on the house, one of the first things I did was build a chicken coop. And I don't mean some rickety thing made out of scrap wood. I designed this coop like it was going to be featured in a magazine. It matched the paint scheme of my house, had proper ventilation, predator-proof hardware cloth, and even a little green roof that looked amazing. Honestly, it was nicer than most people's sheds. Then came the fun part of picking out my girls. I ended up with 6 hens, all different breeds, so I'd get a variety of eggs. I named them after actresses because, well, why not? There was Meryl Streep, a beautiful black and white barred rock. Jennifer Lopez, a red Rhode Island red who thought she was the boss of everyone. Reese Witherspoon, a sweet little buff Orpington. You get the idea. These weren't noisy birds. Hens don't crow like roosters, and mine were pretty quiet even by hen standards. They spent their days pecking around in their enclosed run, taking dust baths and laying the most gorgeous eggs you've ever seen. The neighbors on either side of me thought they were cute and asked if they could bring their kids over to see them sometimes. Everything was perfect for about 6 months. I was getting beautiful fresh eggs every day, the girls were happy and healthy, and I was really settling into the neighborhood routine. I'd wave to people when I was out working in the yard, help my elderly neighbor with her groceries sometimes, that kind of thing. Then I met the HOA president. Her name was something generic and suburban, so let's just call her the president since I don't want to use names anyway. She was one of the newer residents, maybe been there about 3 years. She drove this pristine white SUV that looked like it got detailed every week, and she always had this clipboard with her when she walked around the neighborhood. Not like she was delivering mail or anything official, just observing. I first noticed her because she'd started taking these really long walks past my house. At first, I thought maybe she just liked the route, but then I realized she was always slowing down when she got to my backyard. My property backs up to a little nature trail that's technically public, so people walk their dogs back there all the time. But this woman was different. She wasn't walking a dog, and she definitely wasn't just enjoying nature. One Saturday morning, I was out refilling the chicken waterer when I saw her back there with what I swear looked like binoculars. She was standing behind this big oak tree looking right at my coop. When she saw me notice her, she quickly put whatever she was holding into her purse and walked away really fast. I thought that was weird, but I didn't think too much about it until the following Tuesday when I got home from a grocery run and found an envelope taped to my front door. It was an official-looking letter on HOA letterhead. No friendly, welcome to the neighborhood or hope you're settling in well. Just straight to business. Notice of violation. Case hash 2023-047 Dear Homeowner. It has come to our attention that you are harboring unauthorized livestock and/or agricultural animals on your property in violation of community standards. This constitutes a serious breach of our neighborhood covenants and represents a threat to property values and community aesthetics. You are hereby ordered to cease and desist this activity immediately. All animals must be removed from the property within 14 days of this notice. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $100 beginning on day 15. The board takes these violations seriously and expects immediate compliance. Sincerely, HOA Board of Directors. I read this thing 3 times before it really sank in. Livestock? My 6 quiet hens that most people didn't even know existed were apparently livestock now. And threatening property values? I looked over at my beautiful professionally built coop and just started laughing. I walked out to the backyard where the girls were doing their usual thing. Meryl was taking a dust bath, Hennifer was pecking at some bugs, and the others were just hanging out in the shade. Well, girls, I said out loud, looks like someone from the HOA just declared war. But here's the thing about me. I'm not the type to panic or get all emotional when someone tries to push me around. I'm a problem solver. So instead of getting upset, I got curious. What exactly did this woman think she was going to accomplish? I went inside, fired up my computer, and wrote a very polite email to the HOA board. I made sure to copy the president on it since I had a feeling this whole thing was coming from her. Dear HOA board members, thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. I believe there may be some confusion about the regulations governing domestic fowl in our area. Please find attached the relevant county zoning ordinances and municipal codes that specifically permit up to 8 domestic fowl on properties of this size and zoning classification. As you can see, my 6 hens are well within the legal limits. I have also attached my property's official zoning confirmation from the county planning department, which I obtained before purchasing this home. I believe this clears up any misunderstanding about compliance. My hens are completely legal and properly maintained according to all applicable regulations. Please let me know if you need any additional documentation. Best regards, OP. I attached PDFs of everything. The county code section that explicitly allowed my chickens, the zoning map showing my property classification, even the email from the zoning department confirming everything was legal. I figured that would be the end of it. I mean, when someone shows you actual laws and official documentation, most reasonable people back down, right? I should have known better. 2 days later, I was checking my mail when I heard the sound of an engine idling behind me. I turned around and there was the white SUV pulled right up to the curb. The president got out and walked over to me like she was about to serve me with a lawsuit. She was exactly what you picture when you think suburban HOA president. Perfect hair, expensive workout clothes that had clearly never seen an actual workout, and that clipboard tucked under her arm like some kind of authority symbol. Your little email doesn't change anything, she said, without even saying hello first. I don't care what the county says. This is our community, and we set the standards here. Those chickens are unsanitary, they're loud, and they're absolutely bringing down property values. I just stood there for a second trying to process the fact that this woman was actually doubling down after I'd shown her the legal documentation. They're hens, I said finally. They don't crow, and they're probably cleaner than most people's pets. Plus, as I mentioned in my email, they're completely legal. She got this look on her face like I'd just told her the earth was flat. Our community bylaws clearly state no nuisance animals, she said, pulling out her clipboard and waving it around, and I find them to be a nuisance. You'll be hearing from our lawyer. Then she got back in her SUV and drove off, leaving me standing there wondering if I'd somehow slipped into an alternate universe where showing someone actual laws didn't matter. That night I pulled out the HOA bylaws and read through the whole thing. Sure enough, there was a section about nuisance animals, but it was clearly talking about things like aggressive dogs or animals that make noise or smell. There was nothing about chickens specifically, and definitely nothing that would override county zoning laws. But I could see what she was trying to do. She couldn't win on the existing rules, so she was going to try to change them. The next week, everyone in the neighborhood got an email with the subject line, Emergency Community Alert, protecting our neighborhood's prestige. The email was something else. It talked about maintaining community standards and preserving property values and how certain residents were trying to turn our beautiful neighborhood into a rural farming community. She called for an emergency vote to amend the bylaws to specifically ban all poultry and fowl regardless of any conflicting municipal ordinances. She scheduled the vote for the following month and sent out these dramatic flyers talking about how chickens would attract rodents and predators and lower everyone's home values. She even included these stock photos of rundown farms that looked nothing like my setup. But apparently, the president wasn't content to wait for the vote. About a week before the scheduled meeting, I was working in my home office when I heard voices in my backyard. I looked out the window and saw two guys in uniform standing near my coop. My heart jumped for a second until I realized they were city code enforcement officers, not police. I went outside to see what was going on. "Good afternoon," one of them said. "We received a complaint about a possible noise violation and unsanitary conditions. Mind if we take a look around?" I invited them into the backyard and walked them over to the coop. The girls were doing their usual thing, and I could see both officers trying not to smile as Hennifer came over to investigate their shoes. "Ma'am," the second officer said, "this is honestly the cleanest coop I've seen in 20 years of doing this job. Your birds look healthy, the setup is professional grade, and I can barely hear them over the traffic noise. You're in complete compliance with everything." The first officer was looking at his paperwork. "The complaint said something about smell and noise, but I don't detect either. Whoever called this in might have been thinking of a different type of operation. After they left, I realized the president had played her last card and lost. She'd probably been hoping the city would find some violation she could use to justify the HOA action. Instead, she'd gotten official confirmation that my setup was not just legal, but exemplary. But that's when I started thinking differently about this whole situation. Up until that point, I'd been treating this like I was just some guy with backyard pets. The president was treating me like a hobbyist who didn't know what I was doing. But what if I wasn't just a hobbyist? That night, I started researching state agriculture laws and local business ordinances. What I found was pretty interesting. It turned out that legitimate agricultural businesses, even small ones, have significantly more legal protections against HOA interference than pet owners do. I spent the weekend reading everything I could find about cottage food laws, right to farm statutes, and small business regulations. By Sunday night, I had a plan that was either brilliant or completely crazy. Maybe both. Monday morning, I drove to City Hall and filed paperwork for a business license. Nothing huge, just a simple LLC called the Local Yoke. I took a food handler safety course online, registered with the state agriculture department, and even got a small business insurance policy. The whole thing cost me less than $300 and took about 2 weeks to process. While I was waiting for the paperwork to come through, I built a beautiful little roadside stand. Nothing fancy, just a nice wooden structure that looked like something you'd see at a farmer's market. I made sure it complied with every single HOA rule about lawn fixtures: right height, appropriate materials, proper setback from the street. The day my business license arrived in the mail, I set up the stand at the end of my driveway with a hand-painted sign, "The Local Yoke, fresh farm eggs, $5 per dozen, honor system." And right at the bottom, in smaller letters, "Proudly produced in an HOA-free zone." I figured maybe I'd sell a few dozen eggs to neighbors who were curious. What I didn't expect was how popular it would become. The first customer was my next-door neighbor, an older woman who'd always been friendly. She came over that same afternoon and told me she'd been buying expensive organic eggs at the fancy grocery store across town, but mine looked even better. She bought 2 dozen and told me she'd spread the word. By the end of the week, I was selling out every day. People would stop by on their morning walks, parents would bring their kids to see the chickens and leave with eggs, and I started getting texts from neighbors asking me to save them a carton. The honor system worked perfectly. People would leave exact change or sometimes a little extra. The best part was that it became this cute neighborhood thing. Kids would get excited to see the chickens. People would chat with each other while they were buying eggs, and I heard from multiple neighbors that they loved having something that made our area feel more like a real community instead of just another suburb. I had to expand my flock a little to keep up with demand. I added 2 more hens, staying well within my legal limit of 8. The girls seemed to enjoy having more company, and the egg production ramped up nicely. About 3 weeks after I opened the stand, I was refilling it on a Saturday morning when this big pickup truck pulled up. Out stepped this middle-aged guy wearing a golf shirt and khakis. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him at first. "You're the chicken guy," he said with a grin. "My wife's been complaining about you for weeks, but I had to come see for myself." Then it clicked. This was the HOA president's husband. I'd seen him at a neighborhood barbecue the previous summer, back before his wife declared war on my poultry. "Hope the eggs are worth the marital strife," I said, trying to keep things light. He laughed and grabbed 2 cartons from the cooler. "Listen, I don't care about HOA politics or community standards or any of that stuff. I just want a good breakfast. My wife buys these expensive organic eggs from some fancy store, but they don't taste like anything. These actually taste like eggs." He became a regular customer after that. Every Saturday morning, sometimes Sunday too, he'd pull up in his truck, grab his eggs, and we'd chat about sports or the weather or whatever. He told me his wife had no idea he was buying from me and asked me not to mention it if I ran into her. I thought that was hilarious, but I kept his secret. The president, meanwhile, was getting more frustrated by the week. I'd see her driving past my house multiple times a day, always slowing down to glare at the egg stand. The emergency HOA vote she'd called for kept getting postponed because not enough people showed up to the meetings. Turns out most of the neighborhood either didn't care about my chickens or actually liked the egg stand. I thought maybe she'd given up and moved on to some other crusade. Then, about 2 months after I'd opened the stand, I came home from a client meeting to find another envelope taped to my door. This one was even more official looking than the first. Multiple pages, legal language, the works. Final notice of violations. Case hash 2023-047B. Dear property owner, the HOA board has identified multiple serious violations of community covenants occurring on your property. 1. Operation of unauthorized commercial enterprise. 2. Violation of community signage ordinances. 3. Continued harboring of prohibited animals. 4. Creating traffic safety hazards through commercial activity. These violations represent a serious threat to community standards and property values. You are assessed the following fines. Commercial enterprise violation, $1,000. Signage violation, $200. Daily animal violation, 60 days, $6,000. Traffic hazard violation, $300. Total amount due, $7,500. Payment is due within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in legal action and potential foreclosure proceedings. I sat down on my front steps and read through this thing, getting angrier with each line. $7,500 for selling eggs to my neighbors. The president had clearly decided that if she couldn't ban my chickens, she'd bankrupt me instead, but here's where her plan backfired spectacularly. See, when I was just some guy with backyard chickens, I didn't have a lot of legal recourse against HOA harassment, but now I wasn't just some guy with chickens, I was a licensed business owner operating a legal agricultural enterprise. And agricultural businesses have very specific legal protections. I spent the weekend researching and making phone calls. I talked to a lawyer who specialized in agricultural law, read through state right-to-farm statutes, and pulled up every piece of documentation I'd filed when setting up the business. Monday morning, instead of writing an email, I had a lawyer draft and send a formal response. Certified mail, return receipt requested, addressed to the entire HOA board. The letter was beautiful, professional, completely factual, and absolutely devastating. It started by acknowledging receipt of their fine notice, then systematically destroyed every single claim they'd made. First, my business was completely legal and properly licensed by both the city and state. I had a valid business license, food handler certification, agricultural registration, and insurance. The letter included copies of everything. Second, my signage was within all HOA guidelines for lawn fixtures. Size, materials, placement, everything was compliant. The letter included photos and measurements. Third, my chickens were explicitly permitted by county zoning laws, which supersede HOA covenants. The letter included the relevant statute citations and county documentation. Fourth, there was no traffic safety issue. My stand was on my own property, fully within the setback requirements, and customers parked in their own driveways or on the street where parking was legal. But here's the best part. The letter didn't just defend my operation, it went on the offensive. It pointed out that under state right-to-farm laws, HOA covenants cannot interfere with legitimate agricultural activities. It cited several court cases where HOAs had been forced to pay damages for trying to shut down legal agricultural businesses. Then it got really fun. The letter formally demanded that all fines be rescinded immediately, noting that they were fraudulent since my operation was completely legal. It stated that any attempt to collect these bogus fines would be considered harassment and tortious interference with a legal business. And finally, it gave the board 30 days to provide a written acknowledgement that my micro-farm operation was legal and would not be subject to further interference. If they didn't comply, the letter stated, I would file suit for harassment, interference with business operations, and legal fees. The lawyer told me that most HOA boards, when faced with the prospect of an expensive legal battle their insurance wouldn't cover, would fold immediately. He was right. 10 days later, I got a call from someone who identified himself as the HOA board secretary. Not the president herself, but some other board member who sounded like he just wanted this whole thing to go away. He told me the board had met an emergency session and voted to rescind all fines related to my agricultural operation. He said they'd officially recognized that my business was legal and compliant and that there would be no further interference. He also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the president had submitted her resignation from the board, effective immediately. A week after that, I got a formal letter from the HOA board, signed by all the remaining members, confirming that my micro-farm was recognized as a legitimate agricultural business and that all previous fines and violations had been voided. The letter was professional and polite. but you could practically feel the frustration coming through the page. They'd been forced to admit that everything I was doing was not just legal, but protected by law. But the story doesn't end there. About a month later, I was sitting on my front porch on a Sunday morning, drinking coffee and reading the paper. It was one of those perfect spring days where everything felt right with the world. The girls were out in their run, pecking around and enjoying the sunshine. The egg stand was already empty because I'd sold out by 9 a.m. I heard a car pull up and looked over to see a white SUV parked at my stand. The driver was wearing a baseball cap and oversized sunglasses, clearly trying not to be recognized. But I knew that SUV. The former president got out, looked around nervously to make sure no one was watching, and quickly grabbed a carton of eggs from the cooler. She shoved a $5 bill into the cash box and started walking back to her car. "Morning," I called out cheerfully, loud enough to make sure she heard me. "Fresh batch just went in this morning." She froze like a deer in headlights, then continued walking without making eye contact. "Tell your husband I said hi," I added. "He's one of my best customers." She practically ran to her SUV and drove off without looking back. I sat there sipping my coffee and laughing. The woman who'd tried to fine me $7,000 for selling eggs was now buying those same eggs because, well, they really were that good. That became a regular thing. Every few weeks, the white SUV would show up on Sunday morning, always with the driver trying to be inconspicuous. She never acknowledged me, never made eye contact, just grabbed her eggs and left as quickly as possible. Her husband, meanwhile, had stopped trying to hide it. He'd pull up in his truck, buy his 24 eggs, and we'd chat for a few minutes. He told me his wife had tried buying eggs from 3 different fancy grocery stores, but nothing tasted as good as mine. She finally gave up and started sending him to buy from me, though she made him promise to never mention where they came from when she cooked with them. The business kept growing. Word spread beyond the neighborhood, and I started getting customers from across town. I had to limit sales to locals only because I couldn't keep up with demand. The girls were working overtime, and I was making enough from egg sales to cover their feed costs plus a nice little side income. The best part was how it changed the neighborhood dynamic. People would stop and chat while they were buying eggs, kids would bring friends over to see the chickens, and the whole area felt more like a real community. Several neighbors told me they'd started vegetable gardens inspired by my mini farm setup. Even the longtime residents who'd been skeptical at first came around. The elderly woman across the street, who'd initially worried about property values, became one of my most loyal customers. She told me the chickens reminded her of growing up on her grandmother's farm, and she loved watching them from her kitchen window. About 6 months after the whole legal battle ended, there was an HOA election to fill the remaining board positions. I didn't run myself, but several of my egg customers did. They campaigned on a platform of common sense community management and won by huge margins. The new board was much more reasonable. They focused on actual community needs like organizing neighborhood cleanups and maintaining the common areas instead of trying to micromanage everyone's lifestyle choices. At their first meeting, they officially updated the HOA bylaws to include an agricultural exemption clause, making it clear that legal farming activities were protected. They also added language about working cooperatively with residents instead of treating every minor issue like a criminal violation. As for the former president, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband had started looking at houses in other areas. Something about wanting a more upscale community with better enforcement standards. Her husband apparently wasn't enthusiastic about moving, since he'd have to find a new egg supplier. The last time I saw her was about a year later. I was working in my garden when her white SUV pulled up one final time. She got out, walked over to my fence, and just stood there for a minute looking at the chickens. "You know," she said finally, "they really are beautiful birds." Then she got back in her car and drove away. I never saw the SUV again after that. These days, the micro farm is bigger than ever. I've got my full complement of 8 hens now, all different breeds, producing a rainbow of eggs. The stand sells out almost every day, and I've got a waiting list of people who want to become regular customers. I still work in tech, but the farm has become this amazing side project that brings me way more satisfaction than I ever expected. There's something really rewarding about providing fresh, healthy food to your neighbors and watching kids get excited about where their breakfast comes from. The girls are all getting older now. Meryl Streep is the grand dame of the flock at 4 years old, still laying reliably and keeping the younger hens in line. Jennifer Lopez finally mellowed out and stopped trying to boss everyone around. The newer additions have integrated perfectly, and the whole flock has this peaceful, contented vibe. Every morning when I go out to collect eggs and refresh their water, I think about how this all started. Some busybody with a clipboard thought she could push around a newcomer who didn't know any better. Instead, she ended up creating a neighborhood institution that everyone loves. And every few months, when I see her husband at the hardware store or the grocery store, he gives me this little nod and tells me how much he misses the fresh eggs. His wife still makes him drive across town to some expensive organic place now, and he always complains that they don't taste nearly as good. The best part is my little sign that I still have at the bottom of the egg stand advertisement. Proudly produced in an HOA free zone. New neighbors ask about it sometimes, and I love telling them the story of how a handful of chickens taught an entire community about the importance of doing your homework before you pick a fight. Sometimes the good guys really do win. The next one is a malicious compliance story. If you've seen my other posts in this subreddit, they all seem to do something with trucking. Trucking and diesel mechanics, which was my entire adult careers. I think truck driving is mostly about compliance and malicious compliance. I hope this fits here. In high school, I went to tech school for auto mechanics. Since I was little, I always wanted to be a mechanic. Upon graduation, I went directly to work as a mechanic. The work didn't bother me so much, but I hated the shop. One day I realized the best part of my day was the test drive. So I thought being a truck driver would be the perfect job for me. So I worked towards that goal. Soon after my 20th birthday, I got a job driving a truck. I loved the open road. Back then, Pennsylvania used the Class 1, 2, 3 license system. Class 1 was for 18-wheelers. Class 2 was for large trucks, over 30 KLBs, gross vehicle weight. Class 3 was passenger vehicles. The company I worked for had 2 delivery trucks, and I was driver #2. All was great, till about 3.5 years after I started, Pennsylvania decided to go with the federal commercial driver's license. The classes all worked the same, with differences. Instead of 1, 2, 3, it is now A, B, C. Class A is 18-wheelers, Class B is all other trucks over 27 KLBs, and Class C was passenger vehicles. Class 3 and Class C vehicles only needed a regular driver's license to drive them. All other classes required extra testing to get the proper license. Once you had your truck permit, you had to be able to get a truck and licensed driver to test drive and practice with. Then take the driving test, followed by the written test to get your license. I have a problem. I don't know another CDL driver, nor anyone who will allow me to borrow a truck to take the test. My only other option is to enroll into a truck driving school. At 20, living on my own, that was not an option. Our trucks were originally rated at Class 3 because they had no air brakes and weighed 28 KLBs. The company chose this route so they could pay drivers less. However, with the federal class system, our trucks are now Class B requiring a CDL, so the characters. There is me, OP, a 20M truck driver, Fred 40-ish-M, the company part owner, John 30-ish-M, my manager under Fred. Pennsylvania had a 3-month deadline to get your CDL or you cannot drive. One day John asks me, "Are you going to get your CDL?" I say, "I don't know. Is the company going to pay for it?" "I don't know," said John. "Let me talk to Fred." At this point, I am the only driver they have. John and I work together well. I have a great working relationship with everyone in the company, and our customers as well, everyone but Fred. Fred bought into the company a year ago. From day one, he had an issue with me. He always assumed I was doing the wrong thing, but never had true cause. Since day one, he would only speak to me if he had to. No small talk, no smile. A month passes, and I do not get an answer one way or the other, till Fred asks me one day, "Are you going to get your CDL?" I say, "Are you paying for it?" "No," he says. So I reply no as well. Another month goes by and Fred and I have the same conversation. But this time Fred asked, "What are you going to do for work?" I looked at him dead in the eye and said, "This isn't the only job." The malicious compliance. What I knew that Fred apparently didn't realize was that in just over 2 weeks, they could not deliver product unless they hire someone for a lot more money to drive. So they were going to have to comply to my demand or lose 85% of their business. With almost 2 weeks to go till the deadline, John says to me, "On Saturday, take the company pickup, drive to Harrisburg, and get your permit. You will be paid for your time." I found a few weeks earlier that if I drove the same truck for 3 years, I could get a waiver of the permit. As long as the company owner is willing to sign an affidavit that I drove there 3 years or more, I could skip all of the driving portion, get my permit, then take the written test and get my CDL. I did not tell Fred that. Instead, I went to the other owner of the company and had him sign. Saturday comes, I get on the road at 4 a.m. to be in Harrisburg, DMV by 5:30 or 6 a.m. When I get there, I am surprised. The line for the DMV runs out the door and around the block. I estimate when they open at 7 a.m. I will be about 500th in line. It took another 2.5 HRs, but I walked out with my permit. Now for the test. To Pennsylvania's credit, they had a firehouse in every county as a temporary CDL testing site, due to the volume of people who needed testing. I tried to get into 3 different testing sites, but they were packed and closed before I navigated the line to get in. After that, my office called around to reserve a spot for me. Finally, on Thursday afternoon, I get a call to get to a particular testing site in 1 hour, and I have a seat to take the test. The problem? I was an hour and a half away from the site. Well, I floored it, bent a few laws, but I got to the site as they were closing the doors and got in. To get a CDL, you must pass the general truck test and the air brake test. Then you can take the test for endorsements on your license. They include tanker, school bus, passenger, bus, double buses, think long bus that bends in the middle, double and triple trailers, commonly seen behind FedEx and UPS trucks, and lastly, hazmat, for trucks hauling hazardous materials over 50 pounds. I was there to take 2 tests. I took all but 1. I took every test but hazmat. I was the last person to walk in and sit down with my test. I was the first to leave. As I was walking out, I heard one guy say to his friend, "I guess he failed." In the back of the room was a computer that graded your test and gave you the score right then, 80 and above to pass. Fingers crossed my test was ran through the computer. I passed all tests with my lowest score being an 87, each test scored individually. That Saturday, same deal. Take the pickup, drive to Harrisburg, get my license. But this time I left at 3 a.m., and good thing I did. This time I was about 300th in line. It still took about 2 hours once I got inside. By the time I came out with my license, the line was over 1,500 people and growing. All in all. Over that 2-week period, I got about 25 HRs of overtime, a CDL, and a pay raise. I left the company about a year later. I continued to drive trucks for the next 11 years, before becoming a diesel tech. Having a CDL was very helpful through my diesel career. In most cases, having the CDL got me to the front of the line and/or increased my starting salary. In some shops I worked, I was the only tech legal to drive a truck on test drives. Anyway, thank you for watching.